This episode is proudly supported by Anchor Food Professionals. Whether you're a caterer, cafe operator, or chef running a commercial kitchen, everyone knows quality products are the foundation of successful dishes. Anchor Food Professionals is a trusted supplier to the hospitality industry and has built a stellar reputation thanks to their consistently excellent butter, cream, and cheese. As the food service business of Fonterra, Anchor Food Professionals is home to many well-known brands such as Perfect Italiano, Mainland, Western Star, and Bega, and is now an important part of the Australian food service sector. Anchor Food Professionals has a history of innovation and expertise in sustainable dairying that delivers a world-class product portfolio. If quality cheese, cream, and butter are important to your creations, head to anchorfp.com.au to explore the range.
Knowing your own limits is a really powerful thing. Like, how much more can I do? Can I take on this project? Can I do the competitions while I'm doing work? Is I just always keep trying and test that kind of idea as much as possible.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Dirty Linen with me, your host, Dani Valent. I am really happy to be with you because today we are going traveling. New York is one of those cities that I feel like I'm always planning my eating in. It's years since I've been there, and realistically, I have no near future plans to go. But even so, I'm often reading about the restaurants there, trying to keep up with the neighbourhoods, and editing my personal list of must-eats and need-to-tries. Top of that list right now is Acru, which is co-owned by Daniel Garwood, a chef from Tassie. The next best thing to making a booking is chatting to the man himself. Daniel, welcome to Dirty Linen.
Oh, Dani, thank you so much for having me.
Really excited to have you on the show. Thanks so much for doing it. I know you've just been running around the restaurant. Tell us exactly what's happening today.
Today's the day that we're closed, so it's a good chance for us to try and catch up on a lot of the mise en place. We're pretty surprised in the amount of reservations and how everything's kind of taken off here at the restaurant. So it's just a really good day to catch up, get ready for the week and coming ahead.
So tell us about Acru. What's it like? What's the setup? What's the kind of food you're doing there?
Yeah, so the restaurant's really interesting. So basically, it's a war era like tavern, is the main the setting. But then in the field, we're just still trying to stick with that vintage look to it. So older dried flowers around, really nice green banquet table, vintage chairs, everything like that. And then as far as the food we're doing, is trying to just be more in that gastronomy kind of setting. So the food we do is I wanted to actually kind of start with something that was a bit Australian, funnily enough. When I was trying to come up with the menu and the concept, so it just felt more natural to stick with something that just felt a bit more closer to me. And then as far as the menu finishes, we kind of finish on some Australian desserts and things. But trying to stick with still kind of those the really firm morals that we have of only using local produce. As far as maybe the tri-state area here in New York, including New Jersey and going up as far as Maine. That's kind of as far as we kind of started with, and then it's just really taken off. Starting to get known as an Australian restaurant now, which was never quite the intention, but it's happened that way.
Yeah, it's so interesting because the group that the restaurant is part of, tell us a bit about that because there's certainly other influences there.
No, for sure. So basically, so in partnership with the restaurant is JP and Elia Park of Adamix, Attaboy, and Naro. So basically, as far as they're pretty much the representatives of South Korea to New York, and how much influence they brought from Korea, to New York, and how that's really just taken off. Adamix now being number 6 in the world, and so I was quite fortunate to work with them at Adamix for the 2 years. When I first arrived here, and then they supported me in my career through that whole time, and supporting through the competition, and then we started working on this project about June last year, and so it's just been a crazy ride. But it's so funny to kind of end up with these influences, when people were asking about when the place, when people started hearing about this place opening, thinking that it's is it going to be another Korean concept, and then trying to tell a few people no, it's actually kind of Australian, and then it gets a few giggles for sure.
Well, I mean, one thing that made me giggle when I was reading through a recent menu was the golden hay time, which is one of the desserts. You mentioned the desserts have a bit of an Aussie influence. Tell us about that dish and some of the other dishes. I mean, I'm interested in what you think Australian food means, especially when using produce local to the region.
No, for sure. I mean, yeah, to be fair, that's actually been one of the favorite ones, the golden hay time. It's really kicked off, and then especially how I guess some of some of the social issues are over here and as well. It's like when you tell them what it's kind of from, it's it gets people laughing. You you can actually be open to talk about some of the situation. It's like, no, it's actually a golden gay time, and then a few people start to turn their heads. And it's like, no, 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 look it up. I promise you, this is a dessert we have in Australia, and it's like. And then people eat it. We basically take like a salted caramel ice cream and then infuse it on toasted hay, and then we creme brulee it afterwards. So it's just quite like a fun, different take on a popsicle. And then so how it's been received has been quite fantastic. So it's going to be a hard one to kind of change off the menu eventually.
Well, keep it on till I get there. What about the broader idea of what Australian food means? I mean, I think it's something we're always wrangling with locally. Like, what does it mean to be an Australian chef, or what does it mean to try to create an Australian menu? But you're doing it on the other side of the world using produce that's not Australian. Like, tell us how you think about Australian food.
Yeah, I definitely agree. It's been the absolute hardest thing to try and define, especially because we work with branding teams and PR teams over here, and there was something that kept getting brought up, and I'm just like, look, this is going to get extremely hard to define. And the way that I can only think of it from a sense of memory, and you look at the influence of how a lot of people, when they were moving over to Australia during different time periods, when the Italians and the Greeks move over at that time, and then afterwards in 1970s when a lot of Southeast Asia, and so you kind of say like that, like obviously it's a really new culture of cuisine, but that's as far as my best way to explain it is this is what it has to be. So even for one of our courses here, we have we treat it like a green-based laksa. And so just explaining about, during this time in the 1970s, and especially in the Sydney kind of area, when that kind of situation moved over, it's it's very popular in our culture. And it's also a really good representation, because you think of the Australian produce and how high in quality it is, that you have these kind of dishes that come through using amazing produce. But I think that's kind of something that's really to be said about Australian cuisine, and how we take these other influences, but it does start to turn into our own. I think over especially probably the next 10 to 20 years, it'll be interesting to see how that develops even further.
Absolutely. I mean, I guess you must also be bringing influences from other stints in your career, and you certainly have moved around a lot. I mean, I feel like this part of the conversation could take ages because you've done so much. But to give us a little potted history of your career and some of the key turning points.
Yeah, so I guess it was quite funny. The first big travel I did was when I left Tasmania, and I moved up to Sweden to work at Faviken. So that was probably quite funny to leave a relatively small population of Ireland, and then to move up to the middle of nowhere in Sweden and ended up feeling quite similar, except you've got moose and things running around. So that was a fantastic experience. And then just talking with the people there, I wouldn't say it was too far off some of the people I've met and lived with in Tasmania. But it's more when you start moving to some of the bigger cities, when I was living in Torino for quite a while, and it's just I hadn't really ever lived in a big city before. And so those kind of influences of bonding and meeting these people from different cultures was fantastic. But yeah, you are right. I think I could talk about this all day, to be fair.
I know you've spent some time in Korea. Can we hop to that and tell me about I guess what that period has meant to you and what you've brought forward?
I was going to say, because that was probably, if there was a place that I've lived that I think was the most impactful, it was definitely living in Korea. So I think back to my first 6 months of living there, and the culture shock that came through was so intense. I really wasn't sure if I could hack it and make it out there, just with all that the constantly not understanding what's happening around you, let alone the language, and just some of the mannerisms and just cultural aspects. But ended up sticking through it. And just because what we do at the restaurant is we just go out every weekend non-stop, visiting other cities and just trying to learn as much as we could about the culture and how they did things ancient fermentation and all these other things, and just to see how these small aspects of how there's a thing called a myongin. And so basically there's one person that has this role of being a cultural leader to one technique, whether it's how they preserve meshul, which is the green plum, or how they make gochujang, and then like all the other jangs itself, like, you know, the fermented paste, like there's generally one for each of those. So we actually got to spend a lot of time with those people and just see these, you know, these people that are so dedicated to their craft was just completely inspiring.
Oh, that sounds so life-changing, because I think, you know, we do tend to be a bit, you know, dilettantish in Western culture and just trying all kinds of different things and being, you know, a jack of all trades. Have you taken any of that sort of specialization forward?
Oh, definitely. I mean, it's quite hard because, yeah, you do get into the same conversation where it's like, you know, I tend to do a lot of things. So it was really nice to see. I mean, to see it, like, you know, we can take the techniques and try to replicate it. We're never going to be as good or as dedicated as they are, to be honest. You know, their whole lives are based around this one thing, which would be really, like, again, it's still just like, you know, when you start utilizing the products more and you've, like, because we can get some of their products over here, and it was nice to use it when we were at Atomix, but you really tend to respect it as much as possible. Like, you're not going to, like, see someone, like, waste it or use it, like, improperly. It's like, you know, look, this woman's been making this for, you know, 60 years. You've got to, like, it puts a different aspect on it. You know, I've been only cooking maybe 15 years. It's like, okay, so this woman must know more about this product than I know about, you know, most of this career, that's for sure.
It's so interesting. It makes me want to ask you about the role that ambition has played in your life and how strategic you've been. You know, when you see people that devote their whole life to one thing, and here you are hopping around the world trying lots of different things, like, how much have you planned out what you've done?
Yeah, I was going to say, so up until I was about, probably from like 18 till 25, I had a pretty clear plan of what I was gonna do and try and achieve in that period, and then I kind of reset again. I mean, I would say, yeah, because I'm probably one of the more ambitious people that I could think of, which is makes things a bit fun. But yeah, definitely once I moved to Korea, and after the first year, I definitely made some really strong plans of, like, you know, my whole period of, like, planning to come to the US and everything. I had a very, you know, it was a very long plan, but we got there and we made everything work. Like, moving over here, you know, making the plan to open the restaurant, get the green card, and do all those things. So it's like, I was as strategic as I could have. Like, I definitely had a very long written out plan of how I was gonna get to this point.
Oh, so was this on the plan, like co-owning a restaurant in New York?
Yeah, I wouldn't say co-owning. I thought I'd be the owner, but that's all right. It's nice to have the support. Trust me, like, opening in New York, and as much as everyone kind of says, you know, it's one of the hardest things I've ever done. I don't think I've ever seen a more stressful situation. But you could say that about, like, anyone opening a restaurant. But there's definitely a few extra hurdles to jump over here in New York.
So one of the, like, competitions have been threaded through your career, and you were named the San Pellegrino Best Young Chef of the USA 2022 to 2023. Congratulations. We are happy to claim chefs from elsewhere in the Oceania San Pel competition. So I suppose the US is allowed to have you. Tell us about the role of competitions in your life.
Yeah, it's actually going to be a funny point to say to that last one. It's like, because I think the guy that won from Australia, like Robin, he's from Germany. So it was more funny to meet him when we were doing the global final. It's like, oh yeah, okay, we've got an Australian representing the US and a German representing Australia. It's worked out.
Yeah, I guess it says something about international chefing. And the guy who just won, who's coming up on the podcast, it is Korean-born, trained over in Ireland. So yeah, now living in Melbourne. So there's it's great to have that international spin on it.
Oh, it's great. Yeah, no, I think it's the whole point. Like, especially when, like, most of the chefs that travel, you're always going to have, like, a bit of a different edge to it, like, just from, like, the more different, like, cultural aspects. Especially when you're coming out with, you know, your, like, what's your signature dish? Like, it depends on how you want to do it, but I think it always just adds a bit more to the story. It's always something quite fun. But sorry, yeah, well, back to what you were saying about, you know, with the importance of competition. I think it's, like, probably one of the most important things, especially for young chefs, to do in their career. Like, I've always been quite lucky, in the competitions that I did always ended up putting me somewhere, you know, that I couldn't believe or think of. Like, even when I first won the Nestle Golden Chef's Hat, like 2013. So winning that experience, you know, won us a stage to go to the Waterside Inn in London. So let alone just to travel through a bit of Europe when I was like 19, just coming from Tasmania, and then, you know, you're getting funded on a trip and then meeting a lot of different cool people. Even the people that you meet throughout the competition, I'm still friends with now.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So, I mean, what would you say to a young chef who's wondering whether or not to put themselves forward? I mean, it's a lot of work. You know, you've got to have, I guess, an understanding workplace that'll support you through that as well.
Yeah, that's definitely a key point. I was very lucky in where I was working at all the times when, to support you for the training, and let alone even just financially for, if you've got a test with ingredients, so that also gets to a really big point. So it's more like even just talking to the employers and encouraging that this is something really important and you can really impact like your employee's life. Like even to be honest, like when I was working out of the mix, like so when I was doing the training for that competition, it was like I didn't tell anyone, but I'd finish basically service at midnight, and then I'd stay there till 4 or 5 in the morning. I'd bring all my own ingredients in, and I'd practice this dish just over and over again. And I did this for a good couple of months before someone found out, and then they started giving me an extra day off to do the training. I could just be in the restaurant on my own. So it's like that kind of support was just life changing. I would have otherwise I probably would have lost my mind.
Well, yeah, what a stealth move, but it sounds quite tiring. I know people do put so many hours into it, and I also just feel bad that I didn't mention the name of the chef that just won in Australia. His name's also Daniel, so Daniel Kyung-ho Choi is his name, and we wish him all the best in Milan. What advice would you give, the next contestants as they go into the grand finale, Daniel?
Oh, it's really difficult because the funny thing is, like, that grand final being like a year away from now, so it's a lot of time to really think, and like gifted the fact that you can't really change your dish, or I think you're allowed to change like 3 components. So it's whatever the little things that you can do to add it, or just to keep practicing, just to whatever you can do to get that time down, because like when you get there, like the setup's going to be probably completely different from what you did in the regional. So as long as if you've got like a dish that takes 5 hours to make sure you can get it done in about 4 hours. So you're going to have about an hour of leeway, because suddenly you just go into this massive platform and you've got a bunch of people coming up to you, taking photos, trying to talk. And it's like, just big smile on your face, head down, just keep going, grinding through it, but being ready for the variables. But I'd love to talk to Daniel if you ever had any questions, because there's, it's definitely an interesting competition. You're there for about 5 days and they've got you there just working from about 4 in the morning till midnight through media and other events. And you've got to definitely be, I'd recommend to anyone to get there a bit earlier and get some rest from the jet lag, especially if you're coming from Australia, if that was possible.
Yeah, I'll definitely introduce you guys, because I'm sure he would appreciate some word from the inside. What about, you mentioned the support of employers. So let's just tell employers why they should give their chefs this time and support. Like, what can it do for someone's business to have a chef who's steeled for competition?
Yeah, I mean, for sure. Like, depending on how you look at it, the media outreach from this is quite massive, and I think like it's just getting bigger and bigger every year. They do the San Pellegrino competition. So if you've got employees in an ambitious restaurant, like this is definitely a really good support option to help get the restaurant name out there a bit more. And like, also I think it's a really important topic at the moment to show that you are supporting and you're training like your staff and chefs, especially when there's so many options out there for chefs to go work at other restaurants. Like there's an endless opportunity anywhere. So if you had a difference between one employer that's not going to support you and one that does, it's like, it's going to be a pretty easy decision of where you work. So I think that would be... Oh, sorry, I won't clear.
No, you can. Sorry. No, I love that. I mean, I really love the fact that it's the onus is more on employers these days to retain staff rather than staff scrambling for the next job, which brings us to hospitality culture, which is such a massive conversation around the world. The way that staff are supported or otherwise through their careers. You've had such broad experience across many different countries. So I'd love you to give us a bit of a survey of where you think hospitality culture is at in different places, and I suppose over the course of time.
Yeah, I was going to say, so it's a really funny one, because I always actually found that some of the restaurants that I worked at in Australia had a really good relative to work-life balance and culture. So that's why even how we treat the restaurant here is we focus on a lot of the ideals and things that I'd experienced in Australia. But then it's like if you start to look at places like Denmark, and it's like like, even for example, like where I was working at Cadeau, they have an amazing roster now where it's basically 1 week you'll do a 4-day work week, and then the next week you'll do a 3-day work week, and that's constantly changing over. And then if you think about like some of the staff members, like 6 of the staff members have families and kids at home, and they actually get to spend time. Like I think that's a really interesting model, but not completely feasible in every city. But it's just an interesting kind of cultural aspect of how much they really, even just like, I think it's in Danish culture in general, is just to look after your employees. You're living in a place that's 10 months worth of darkness. You want people to try and feel as happy as possible. And then you have places like Korea where it's pretty much the polar opposite. You can get people to work non-stop all day, every day. Everyone's just on a salary, and it's kind of expected to do what's needed for the business.
And what difference do you think that makes to the trajectory of someone's career?
It's really hard to say, because over different points of your life, it's like I do still think it is quite important to get into a habit of having the ability to work hard and like knowing kind of what it takes, because you kind of do have to go through those paces to know that you can like do more. Because it would also be difficult to go into a place and just do an 8-hour workday. It's like there's only so much you can learn within an 8-hour period versus if I'm working 16 hours, like am I going to be twice as good as you at the end? It's like that would be a hard conversation, especially in this day and age. But it's I think it's still something I think about quite often, and what would actually be the best. Something that we tried to do at Atomix as far as that is sorry, we had a 4-day work week, and then we would take the day off of the restaurant, and then we'd just do an R&D day for 6 hours. We'd take all the guys to the market, we'd do some training, and it's like I thought that was a pretty good balance for the work life, especially when everyone here, I'm not sure what Australia is like at the moment, but when you have everyone like paid by the hour, it was a good way to also, you're cutting some of the hours down instead of doing 5 12-hour days, but you're also having a day where we get to train the staff and like teach them about something interesting so they can learn a new skill.
I mean, I suppose the economic pressures are real, and businesses have to succeed for restaurants to stay open. I mean, from your knowledge of the Australian scene and your experience now in the US, do you think it's easier or harder to run a restaurant in America?
It'd be tough to say, because only from my previous experience, it seemed like it was quite possible to do relatively well in Australia. But I'm not sure of like what's happening now. I don't know what happened after kind of COVID, if people were asking for a lot higher wages, because that would be the same problem that I'd say is here, is your labor cost is quite high at the moment. It's like, even though the people say like the New York minimum wage, which is currently $16 an hour, is saying that that's just too low and it needs to go up, and then like I can't think of many businesses that could especially small hospitality restaurants where they could actually do that. But then also we have things like here when you have like the tipping system, which is completely different from every other country in the world, where you can actually turn around and end up earning a lot of money, which those kind of numbers don't really affect the restaurant, because the tip comes in and it goes straight back to the employees. You never see it, you don't put in any of your numbers, anything like that. So that's like an interesting way to look at it. But it does seem like if you can get the numbers into a restaurant here in the US, you can probably do quite well.
I feel like one of the big conversations in Australia has been, that costs are going up all the time, including wages, but also cost of goods. But people are really watching what they're spending. Do you feel like there's similar pressure in the US where, it's the same issues with interest rates and macroeconomic situation? Like, do you feel like people are watching what they're spending?
I would say like it depends on where you are. I guess even in Europe, but Manhattan, I think it seems to be okay. I think people have gone onto the other side of COVID now, and that still enjoy going out, but they still kind of want a deal, which is like, even when I was planning out the restaurant here, it's like we're at a 6-course tasting menu for $95. Like there's not really many other affordable options like that in Manhattan. So I think definitely playing to that key, because you like anytime you go out for dinner, most of the time in New York, in Manhattan, is you're going to end up spending like 120, 140. So sometimes, it's just much cheaper to cook at home, but everyone still seems to go out. Whether they've got a date or they've got clients, it's just a really busy city, and obviously the population keeps it quite helpful.
Yeah, well, $95 for 6 courses sounds like super good value. So I'm even keener to get myself over there. Daniel, I know that mental health has been something that you've thought a lot about during your career. Can you talk about why you focused on it and tell us about Oralis?
Yeah, completely. I mean, it was definitely something I was inspired. Like, when I was going through my TASTAFE training, quite early on when they brought the guys out from OzHelp and Beyond Blue, and they started talking about some of these issues that they'd seen, with the different hospitality industry. And it's like, I worked for also, quite a few chefs early on that I thought, it's been intense. And then if you don't have the support network, it's quite hard to navigate through it. So it's something I always kept in my mind, and like, how can even other friends and chefs working with, some people had seen some intense things. It's kind of like how much like Australia focuses on it, like also with, the Are You OK Day and things like that. Like that's really inspiring, like how much we're talking about these kind of issues, but the rest of the world doesn't seem to be as much. So I think it's a really important topic. And then especially when I moved to a place like Korea, and you're looking at the suicide rate of being like the highest in the world per capita. And so I tried to do an event, after a couple of years of living in Korea. So I called it Oralis, and basically I did a 17-course tasting menu. But I went for like a pretty unique approach, where every dish kind of represented a different aspect of mental health, and kind of like how I saw it as my artistic expression.
Oh,
But
that's so interesting. Yeah, give us some detail on those dishes.
yeah, I mean, it's just like, sorry, trying to think. It was a couple of years ago now. But so what was it? I mean, like some simple stuff, like one of the desserts, be happy. It's all different parts of the bee, but then also other ones where things have been wrapped up. Like I had a bunch of grains wrapped around in a cabbage leaf, like fermented carrot hot sauce kind of thing. And it's like, just talking about how you can feel trapped. Everything's kind of like pressing you down. Keep it closer, but sometimes you just need to open up. So the concepts were quite large. I kind of realized that wasn't going to be like the best approach. That I think it would have been the better idea to just have a nice dinner, have some pretty simple food, and then just have someone out there having the conversation. Because it was a bit intense to be the foreigner in Korea, and then telling you about all these issues that could exist. It was interestingly received.
Okay. I mean, it sounds extremely admirable. I mean, and it's interesting that you say Are You OK Day is inspiring, because I think, I mean, I know it's got a lot of traction and people get a lot out of it, but there is also some people saying, oh, it's too simplistic. It's just, it's got to be much more than that. But it's interesting that from your perspective, it's actually, kind of ahead of some other countries. But yeah, I can imagine that you felt like you'd got yourself in pretty deep when you constructed this 17-course menu, and you're suddenly, I suppose, I guess not putting yourself out there as an expert, but certainly leading a conversation. And I think it's a big thing to do, but, all power to you for giving it a go. I feel like there's no bad way to try to have these conversations.
No, completely. I definitely caught a bit of headwind with it, because I was a bit like upset of how I did the event, and then so I thought, well, no, I'll try and explain it properly. So then we ended up writing a book about it and putting everything into a bit more detail. Like tried to talk to some other people like about the issues and just try and get a bit more collectively, which that ended up having a bit more success. So I was happy with that. But it's definitely something I'll come back to. And I thought, the better way to approach it is to have like a touch. If I had a touch more prestige, maybe my voice could have been louder. And it's like, so I thought, I'll try and come to the US, see if I can make it, and then I can really try and approach this topic.
Oh, that's so interesting. Are there other big things that you want to achieve?
I mean, definitely. I think, like, especially when you look at like in Australia, you've got Beyond Blue, you've got OzHelp. In the US, I haven't been able to actually find like companies that are kind of, and organizations that are like that. So I think it's just something that's so important that I can't believe that Australia is so far ahead on it, that the rest of the world's kind of like, just in this kind of, let's work as much as possible, let's do business. And it's like, well, no, let's everyone's take a second. And you can do all that completely, but you should also just take a second to make sure you're okay. As simple as that.
So, Daniel, I'm sure the restaurant's extremely occupying at the moment, but I'd love you to talk about, when you do find a bit of work-life balance, what do you do with the life part? What else are you interested in?
Oh, geez. I mean, for the last month, definitely haven't seen any balance whatsoever. But before then, I was like, I usually try to find myself and go, like, I do training, weightlift, go for a run. But I've also got a dog now, which kind of actually really helped my mental health. Is just coming home to have this little ball of energy and positivity. So it is quite nice.
Yeah, I definitely am an advocate for the dog life. I'd love you to finish off with some advice for chefs who are looking at your career and going, wow, that is amazing. He's done so much and he's got so much energy and he's really making a name for himself. What would you say is the attitude and perhaps some of the practical steps that people could take?
Yeah, I was going to say, I think the attitude is just to really test yourself and to see what you're kind of capable of. There's like, as much as I'm talking about that in the same sense with like mental health and everything, but you do have to go through a period like, what is the most that I can do? Like knowing your own limits is a really powerful thing. Like, how much more can I do? Can I take on this project? Can I do the competitions while I'm doing work? Is like just always just keep trying and test that kind of idea as much as possible. Like the more that you can do, the more stress that you can take on, like that's really going to be beneficial going into the future. And so, yeah, as I said, the steps would be to take is, the first one's like do a competition while you're doing work. And then as you start to go through, more of your work, it's like, can I take on more responsibility? Can I work on, other things while I'm in my own time? Like even just starting off with journaling, that's being able to like map out your day like that to fit these little things into it and like build a habit and like routines. Like you start to realize that you've got heaps of time to figure out all your, like any future plans, dreams or anything. Like having that time period will definitely be able to help you figure that out.
Wow, very inspiring. So Daniel, okay, so let's say I am coming to New York and I'm going to come to Acru, and I know there are 6 courses, but tell me about one of the dishes that you're really excited to put in front of people at the moment.
Actually, my favorite one's a bit of a mixture of cultures, but it's so basically it's a monkfish liver custard, and then around the outside is a few different condiments essentially that go with it. So it's kind of based on like this Korean idea where they have a thing that's like bibimbap, that we have so much like plated work that goes into it, like aligning all these different elements, and then you can pretty much eat this dish however you want, but typically you're supposed to mix it. But then some of the condiments on the outside is just puff barley, we have dried chives, squid bolognese, and then like carrots that are treated like raisins where they've just been roasted over the fire and then dehydrated and essentially rehydrated in brown butter and some like a fermented carrot hot sauce. And then you just finish the whole thing off with this big fermented carrot soup essentially. And so we kind of sat there and we thought about it. So there's relatively, about 2,000 ways you could probably eat this dish depending on like what time you come in. Like if you want to mix it all together, you can. If you want to segment it off. And then we serve that dish with like what I'm calling like a kind of a typical Australian damper, but it's definitely not. But so we take some of the grains that we have here. So there's a native grain called like a Boston Abruzzi rye. And so we kind of mold that down into a dough, and then we just cook it straight over the charcoal. And then that gets served with a condiment of like roasted pumpkin seeds, sabayon. And so we get to enjoy all those things together. So it's kind of like the idea is to be a little bit luxurious, but also a bit over the top as well.
Oh, it sounds just absolutely exuberant and fun and super tasty. And I want to treat all my carrots like raisins now as well. Thank you so much for chatting to us. Absolute pleasure to have a little slice of New York. Thanks to you. All the best with everything you're going for, Daniel, and can't wait to eat your food.
Oh, no, looking forward to having you over here. And thank you so much for having me on the show.
Absolute pleasure. This is Dirty Linen, and I'm Dani Valent. We air the issues that the hospitality industry finds hard to talk about, hearing from different people with unique perspectives. We want to hear from you as well. If you have something that needs to be said about a topic, get in touch so we can include your perspective. Contact us at dirtylinen@deepintheweeds.com.au or hit us up on Insta @Dirty Linen Podcast. We can't wait to hear from you.